I figured what we could do during this time. I'm not going to talk for 45 minutes. So I'll tell you that right now. Really, this is a time for you to ask questions, and we can engage. I'll tee a couple of things up. So I gave you some handouts of part of what we use in our admissions information for prospective families. And so there's two that I'm just maybe going to focus on. Let me give you here. You can just take one of each out of here. And so there's two that I'm really going to focus on. But again, we can stop and ask questions about any of these pieces. So my role at Hope is I give oversight to admission and family ministry, and how that came about is before I got to Hope, there was an admissions team and process, and that was kind of evolving over time. And then there was what's called parent engagement. And so when Dan Olson reached out to me and said, "Hey, Kevin, you ever think about working at Hope?" Just sent me this quick, pithy email. And I literally remember the day sitting on the couch with my wife, and I was like, "No, hadn't thought about it, not interested." But thanks, and then he reached out to me again, and we started talking. Long story short, as we talked more about the possibility, I said, it sounds like what you guys are doing is really like family ministry. It seems like parent engagement is just like one aspect of this broader thing that you're doing, which is called family ministry. And so I said, well, if you change the title to family ministry, then yeah, I'd be glad to come on board. So we did. That wasn't. But we did change it to family ministry because that's what really was happening at the school. And so as the school was in this position of growth, we were trying to figure out how do we streamline and continue to modify the admission process, because it is a very unique family unit that we're looking for, which is very difficult to find. And so I'll talk a little bit about that just to tee things up. So that was the admission side, and then in the family ministry side, we said, and we knew, the school knew this long before I got there, is that, it's no good getting kids to come into the school if you're not willing to walk alongside the family in a true ministry context. And so what we want to do is to provide avenues for that ministry to happen. So whether it's just conversation with families and parents who are just struggling, you just kind of got an open door policy, to some programmatic things that you try to do without being overly programmatic. To learning experiences where there's mutual learning happening. So a number of things like that, and again, we'll tee some things up to talk that through. So let me first just kind of talk about our admission process and a little bit about our team and kind of where we are. We'll start here in the back with kind of our guidelines and what we look for. So in most schools that actually has an admissions kind of department, it's kind of a first come first serve. Like, you get your stuff in before somebody else, you're good to go. And sometimes I wish it was like that. It would make my job a little bit easier, but it's not. I mean, so for us, it's all about fit. We want to try to find the right fit, and that fit is mutual, right? We want families to really feel like this is a place that they really want to commit to, and we want to feel like this is a family that the Lord has called us to journey with. So there's a few guidelines that we we look at two broad areas. Obviously, there's the parent side and then there's the student side. So location, income, and ethnicity are going to be the same for both parent and student, but we have a preference for families who live in Minneapolis, and that's strategic and also a little happenstance. Strategic because Minneapolis is the largest city, in Hennepin County where we live, and it's the highest concentration of urban families as well. And that's the strategic part. The happenstance part is that we partner. Well, and I guess that's kind of strategic too. We partner with Minneapolis Public Schools for busing, and so they provide busing, so we can offer that free of charge to any family who lives in Minneapolis. So not necessarily happenstance, a little bit strategic as well too. And we're and so Minneapolis is a primary location. Now, does that mean we don't have families who live outside of Minneapolis? No, we do, but it gets a little bit more tricky in the enrollment and the admissions kind of query process to see if that family, would be able to have transportation to get to school. If they're in the sweet spot of who we are, they typically won't have transportation, and so that gets really, really difficult. If they're still within the target but not in the sweet spot, then they probably will have transportation, but those are going to be what we call missional families. And so for them, the stakes are actually higher. It's harder for them to get into school. We take less risk with missional families than we do with, our kind of sweet spot families. So location, income. So again, our target are families that are going to be near or below the poverty level. As an example of that, several years ago, when my children are now in 12 years old and 10 years old, so 6th grade and 4th grade at Hope, when my son, who's 12 years old, when he was going into kindergarten, we applied to a few different schools. One was a school that our denomination owns, which is a private Christian school, and I'm a covenant pastor. We own the school. We're going to apply there, and there was a significant discount if you were a covenant pastor or part of a covenant church. But my son was also right at the cusp of 5 years old, so he was a little bit past the deadline. But they were willing to take him in, and they did accept him. Except, here's the challenge: as soon as we got in, they changed the entire funding deal, so we became the dreaded middle class, where it was we made too much money to afford any scholarship now because they eliminated all the pastoral discounts, and then but we didn't make quite enough to actually be able to afford, so that was no longer an option. And then we applied to a public school, which he got into, but we were still like, not sure about that. We applied to Hope Academy, and we got turned down. And I said, well, wait a second. I think we meet all the criteria. Well, actually, no. You guys make too much money. What? So we didn't make enough to afford to pay for one school, and we made too much. And I said, well, don't you need families that can actually help and pay? And they're like, no, that's not our model. Okay. So while certainly we were disappointed, we also were like, wow, you know what? Good for you. I mean, that's a mission driven. They're sticking to the mission. Years later, I came on board as staff and said, now you could have had me for cheap now. So our
kids go there now.
They go there now, right? Exactly. And so we have a sweet spot of families that are, again, near or below poverty. So close to 75% of our families are in that threshold, and that's a target for us. Ethnicity: most of our families are Hispanic or African American, and so you'll see on I think the About Hope one, you'll see some of the demographic breakdown there with our ethnicity and income, etc. So I like to call it. It hasn't turned into a we yet, but it's a term that I like to use. I call it the sneak preview of heaven, because it becomes every tribe, every tongue, every nation that are interested in this type of education. Now, what you got to realize too is that a lot of our families are not connected to a church. They're not believers, and there's no requirement for them. They don't have to sign any kind of lifestyle statements or anything like that. All they have to do is be open to having their children receive a Christian education. And so for many of them, hope is church for them. And so that's a way for us to be able to continue to share the gospel with them. So those three, again, for parent and student are going to be the same. Where it gets a little bit different is then desire and commitment levels. So for parents, the desire and the commitment level is higher for parents when they're in lower school. Obviously, that makes sense, right? Your second grade child probably doesn't have a lot to say where they're going to school. But what we say is that desire we want to see increase as children get older, so that by the time they're applying to 5th grade or 6th grade, either if they're in Hope Academy or outside, we want that desire to begin to get closer to where the parent is. So the parent commitment never drops down. It's always high. The student commitment eventually comes up, and then in high school we hope that it actually surpasses the parent, that the student is more desirous and more committed to being at Hope. Now, why is that important? Because of the dynamics that a lot of our kids are living in. If you have a parent in high school that all of a sudden is like, oh, well, we need to leave, if that child really, really wants to stay, then we're going to do everything we can to work with that family, even if it means that child temporarily lives with a staff person, so that they can still attend the school. Daryl Gillespie, who's here, is our dean of lower school students. He's an example. I mean, there's many examples that are around the school, but he's an example of that, where one of our current students actually lives with him, and he's an upper school student, and I think scored like one of the highest ACT scores that we've had. Is that right? Or I can't remember.
Just with this class.
Just with that class. One of the higher ones. Yeah. Really bright student, but has had a tremendously tough time, in his life growing up. So the desire and commitment, again, level for parents is always high. And then we want that to increase with the students as they grow. So that's a little bit about the guidelines for admission as we're looking at potential applicants. Those are the things that our team spends a lot of time trying to figure out. And we'll talk a little bit about the application process. So it's fairly similar. But there's a couple of different nuances. So we suggest that potential families either come to a tour that we do quarterly, or we do one-on-one. We do some kind of one-on-one tours, but then we have quarterly open house events. And so those have actually, we've changed that. When I first got here, there was like an open house every month, and then a few of them were actually during the day, like during the middle of the day. And what we found was that they weren't heavily attended. Obviously, the sweet spot of our families often are working hourly jobs, so they can't take off during the middle of the day or it's really difficult for them to take off. Or if they're not working, they've got kids at home. So it just becomes a little bit difficult. So often what we saw was that a lot of the families that were coming to those events were maybe still on the target, but further out in the spectrum of the concentric circles. So we changed that to do them quarterly now, and we try to now do them in conjunction with one of the major events that we have at school, so that, and it's in the evening as well, so that parents can get a sense of what's happening here in the school. The last thing you want to do is have unless you're, and I've been to some of these that are really good, unless you're a really big school with a lot of staff, one of the last things you want to do is have an open house event in the evening when no kids are around, because it just does not feel the same. You're essentially touring a building, and we don't want them touring a building. We want them to experience what life feels like in the classroom setting, with people around. So we do those events during our parent-teacher conferences in the fall and winter, and then our spring tuition conference, so those happen 3 times. The only one that we do during the day is in the summertime, because people tend to have a little bit more flexibility during that time, and that's a one that also is less attended for us, because the hope is by then we've gotten most of our families in. So that's a little bit. So we encourage that kids to come to a shadow day. So for upper school students, we have them shadow the grade that they're applying for. In lower school, they shadow the grade that they're currently in. And that's because lower school, they're pretty much in a classroom. They go to different specials, but they're in a group together in kind of one place. In the upper school, they travel around, and so we want them to get a sense of what it feels like to travel to different classes with a grade that they're looking to apply for. There's a student application. We have that online, which is, again, kind of a first for Hope Academy. So we started that process about a year and a half ago, where we started receiving applications online. And then for lower school, there's a teacher questionnaire. It's kind of a simple 2-sided questionnaire. For upper school, there's 3 letters of recommendation that they have to have from a math teacher, a language arts teacher, and then a non-family community member. And all those are online as well, too. Part of, obviously, the reason is we want to be able to see where they are, not just academically, but those recommendations. And they're kind of it's a form, so they're not actually writing a letter. We'd never get anything if they had to write a letter. So it's a form they kind of check off, and it's looking at various criteria like study habits and leadership, social engagement, behavior. And then there's a section for them to actually write any notes. Those prove to be really helpful as we're looking at paper grades, to get a little bit more anecdote around where the student, is.
I would add that the number one thing that we look for, especially as they're getting older, is their desire to be at the school. And so even if grades are a little lower, or behavior is a little lower, or their test scores are a little lower, that if their desire to be at the school is high, that's the most important piece that we're looking for.
Yeah. How do you determine that from the student through
some
application?
Do you just ask them? Or?
Yeah, so it happens in a couple ways. One, it's on their application, so the student actually has to handwrite their portion of the application. Parents can fill it out online, but the student. So we look at that. We also look at if they do attend a shadow day, which we try to encourage most of our. So we get a chance to see how they interact, and we get feedback from teachers as well too. Also, just a lot of students come with unintended references, and so we get a lot of connections from other people and say, hey, so such and such is applying here. What do you know about that? And so we'll get a lot of feedback from folks in that way. And then if they kind of kind of matriculate through that process, one of the last steps is there's an interview that Nathan and two other staff in the upper school will facilitate that, and during that time is when there's kind of a face-to-face engagement as well.
At what grade level do you begin that process?
The interview, so that starts in 6th grade, where it's actually the student being interviewed formally. Now the switch though is that, and this has been a good thing. So the switch is that we've actually incorporated a little bit more of that into the lower school as well, namely for the parents. So before I got here, the parent was the first time you really have a deep connection with the parent was after the kid has been assessed and you've already accepted them. There may have been 1 or 2 conversations, but there never was really a deep kind of interview deal. And so now we actually have a family interview, parent interview while the child is being assessed. So the difference between upper school and lower school is that the assessment for lower school students happens in the parent interviews at the same time, and they interview with either Leslie or Daryl. Every once in a while, I'll do an interview. In upper school, that interview only happens after the students take their assessment, because we're trying to gauge in a holistic way, do they even get to a place of a final interview? So, yeah.
It becomes more and more difficult to say no each step of the way, and so if you're looking at the application materials and you can tell from the start that it's not going to be a good fit, it doesn't make sense to do that interview, because once you start building that relationship that starts happening in an interview, then it's more and more difficult for both sides to say no, this isn't going to fit. So if it's very clear that it's not going to be a good fit, we don't go to that.
Can I ask a question that doesn't really have to do with admissions, but you had said something about wanting children to want to come here, and you even 4th and 5th. So if you have a student, say a 5th grader, that really doesn't, do you just work with the families to figure out what's going on and solve that problem?
Great
or
question.
do you say, you know what, your child doesn't want to be here, it's clear they don't want to be here, so...
Yeah, that's a great question. So the beauty and the challenge about hope is that it's...
or does it never happen?
No, it does happen. It does happen. The beauty and the challenge is that while there's this framework, everything is contextualized for that family and that dynamic, right? And so sometimes we'll have a child like that,
because much younger than like 5th or so, a lot of kids don't want to.
Yeah, and that happens. And then, but if they, if they have kind of, for lack of a better term, bought in. We see, and we've got a lot of kind of evidence to show that students actually really, really enjoy being at the school, right? So if a child doesn't want to be at school, going into 6th grade, it's gonna be an issue. It's not always an immediate, okay, well that's it, sorry, you don't want to be here. We want to give them a chance, obviously. So if it's coupled though, if that lack of desire is also coupled with behavior challenges.
That's what I was wondering.
Right. So if it's now you got multiplication of things, and because we have and I'll talk about this in a minute, we have a high level of parent accountability. If you also then have a parent who is saying, yeah, I want them to be here, but they're not fulfilling their, then and we've had to have that conversation within the last few weeks with a few families that for some of them it has nothing to do with academics. Some of it is all desire that then translates into behavior things. And for a couple of families, it has nothing to do with the child. It's all the parent. The child is great, but it's the parent. And so we say you need to be at a place where the expectations are lower for you. So.
Is this a time to ask questions?
Yeah, go for it. Go for it.
One question also that I have is a couple. When children are tested, and it's pretty obvious that it doesn't always evidence itself as much when they're in the lower grades, but there's an indication that they may have some learning exceptions that need to be considered. You know, but that's always so difficult with limited resources within the school. And so how do you all meet the needs of those students? And at what point do you just sort of go with your gut check and say, this is not a child that we cannot serve?
Right.
So just how do you resource, and what does your resource team look like?
Yeah. So maybe one coin, two different sides. The first is, can we even serve the child as they're applying, right, to Hope? And then the other side is then, what's the resource that we do have? And so the first part, the filtering process, as we're getting applications, if a child has an IEP or a 504 plan, so individual education plan, or a 504 plan, which requires that they have certain accommodations for them, we look at that, and then we have on our team, on our staff, a few people, namely a person who is kind of our educational specialist. She looks at any IEP, any 504 of a student who's applying, and she then makes a determination if we have the resource to serve that child. So before they even get deep into the process, we look at that right away and say, do we have the resource to serve? So some of it, again, is going to be academic. If it's kind of more than academic, then we also have a social worker on staff, and so they'll look to see how much capacity they have to maybe help meet some of the needs of that child. And so we look at those things really. That's why we get academic records. The minute they apply, we submit a request for a record. So we don't wait until they're accepted. You can't do that. You got to do some filtering to see if they're, what kind of services they're going to need. So there's kind of the educational side, but then there's also if you're an English language learner. So we have a limited capacity for how many students we can take per grade, even per class, per grade for ELL learners. So we can do about, in the lower school, about 6 per grade, per class, and per grade for ELL. And so once we reach that threshold, then if a student is accepted, they have to be on the waiting list. But you can only get on the waiting list if you've been accepted to the school, right? So there's certain things that you gotta kind of meet. So they might do great, but no, they need some services. But we don't have the capacity anymore, so they're on a waiting list. So that's the one side. The first side is the kind of the filtering to see if we can even serve that child. And we have things like title support, which Nathan can probably talk a little bit more closely about. We have ELL support, but again, you're right. It is limited because we don't get the same kind of funding, that a public school is going to get.
And it's tough when you are a school, like Russ was saying, where you want to flip the kind of students that you're trying to help.
That was a big question I had. It was a big note I wrote. I wanted to know about that.
Because you want to give every hope possible, and we find a lot of students are labeled because, but they can overcome some of that. So it's just
So we do have the capacity to meet some of that need. So it's not clearly it's not a flat no. As a matter of fact, most of the students that are coming in are 1 to 2 years behind academically where they need to be, and so they might not need like really deep individualized educational support, but they're going to need some support, and we have some systems in place to help foster that. So on the flip side, if they are in, then there's things like title support. We've got this educational specialist who coordinates specific educational needs for students. If they do have an IEP that can be serviced, or if they do have a 504 plan that can be serviced by us, we do have a school social worker along with an intern that she supervises. They provide emotional support, things like play therapy, but also a tremendous amount of support to the parents to help them navigate the social service sector within the government. So
When you say title support, does that mean that they have access to services at the public school, or does that mean someone comes in?
And they come to your school.
exactly. So yeah.
We've been able to work with Minneapolis to recommend teachers who are licensed, and then to this point, they've been able to hire. Minneapolis has hired the ones that we've recommended as long as they're qualified, and so that's been helpful.
So they
Does that
hire them
happen
and then
during
they serve
school,
your
though?
school.
Yeah.
They serve your school.
Yep. So they're actually it's a beautifully weird. So they're not employed by Hope Academy, but they're inside the school, and these are folks who are also believers as well. So that really helps. They want to be right, and so it's a God thing because you could right, and so technically like the kids come out of class and they have they have offices in the classroom that they will do work with those students.
But that's more dependent on the district being willing to do things that way. But they recognize that the people who we're recommending are going to be people who are going to effectively build relationships with the students and are qualified. And so because it's worked so well, they will often even use our site as a model of what's working well with their model too.
That's great.
So,
The two title folks that came in recently, it just I didn't even know, but just so happened that I actually know both of them. And so we kind of got a kick out of that. And they told me without these are straight shooters, right? And it said, listen, you guys are kicking public schools' butts. What you're able to do with the limited resources that you have, and the outcomes that you're getting. I mean, they literally said you're putting them to shame. I'm gonna tell you. I mean, you're doing a fantastic job, and so praise God, right? I mean, a lot of that is just like the environment, the culture that breeds, a ministry mindset, and so we're grateful for that. So that's a great point. The other side of support too, then, which Nathan can speak to a little bit more, is so in upper school we have academic support for students, and so they can either come before school or after school for academic support. They can come on Saturday, so Saturday morning there is a time for them to be able to.
And what grade level does that start at?
6th grade, so that's 6th through 12th grade. Now there's some requirements. If students are behind in work, then they have to come to academic support, but it's open for, like, my son loves to go in the mornings to academic support, and I'm like, great, all right, and oftentimes he needs to ask a teacher something a little bit more specific, and I'm like, yeah, that's exactly what it's for, so they can set up some time. So maybe say anything more about that. Yeah.
Well, this afternoon I got a session to talk more in detail with that, but he gave a good summary of what that looks like. Yeah.
I have a question for you.
Yeah.
So with your funnel kind of through deciding which students you're taking out, what is the academic parameters you use? So I think it's like, you mentioned this year, okay, they might be a year, 2 years behind.
Yeah.
Kind of what y'all's cutoff point with that?
Yes. Typically in most grades, if they're more than 2 years behind, then it's going to be, because the curriculum is pretty rigorous, it's going to be really difficult. Every once in a while there's an exception to that where we see that it really has nothing to do with ability. This kid just hasn't been putting in great effort, and they just need a different environment. So every once in a while, we'll take a risk with that kid. But they also know, hey, listen, when you get here, you gotta step your game up, and some of those kids that actually eventually begin to change. And we've got some great testimonies of kids who have been able to do that. So typically it's about 2 years is going to be the max.
So when you're looking at percentiles, so middle school sometimes we'll go all the way down to the 15th percentile. in high school, maybe the 20th. But again, there are a lot of different factors in that. So if grades, same thing. If there's a lot of F's and D's, but the student has a high percentile and a high desire, or so those things play together. But usually the 15th percentile, if it's consistently on their standardized tests a lot lower than that, then we would ask if we're able to really serve the students' needs.
I would say that's helpful because even as we're thinking through it, I feel like we get so many applications. I feel like we have to turn down so many because we're like, well, can we actually serve them as well as we can? Yeah. Which might be, I don't know if it's a disservice or a service on our part, whichever way that could be.
Sometimes it's both.
Yeah, because
sometimes it can't be one. Sometimes
because we do get a high volume of applications, but I feel like we look at a lot of them like, wow, because of their grades, they might not be able to kind of recover. So I don't even know if we're given as healthy of an assessment of that initially. That's what I think we can grow through a little bit.
Or given our ability
because I don't think we take percentiles into consideration right now.
That would be good. Do you remediate children? Like what we will do a lot of times, if they're too far behind, we'll just say they have to repeat.
Yeah. In upper school, typically not. Again, it's a rare occasion that it would happen in upper school. In lower school, because there's more time to grow and catch up, we might see. Well, we see it more often. We don't see it a lot, but it's certainly more often than we would ever see in upper school. So it's very, very rare that we'd have an upper school student. Now we have some exceptions might be over the last several years we've gotten with the just changing demographics, we've gotten a number of immigrant children from especially from some of our African countries, and so we've got a couple of families from Somalia where they're very fortunate to get out of Somalia alive, and so to now coming in, we see that the learning style is so different. So we assess in a very Western kind of Scantron, Philip, and so their style is very different. So we realized that for a couple of them, we had to actually do their assessment completely different, and then they showed that they were a lot more competent than what presented, but they still needed to be like a grade below just to be able to catch up.
And there have been times where we've had some students who have started behind from, if they're coming from an African country, that's where English is a big part of that learning process, and then they've been able to jump back up to where they're more likely be at.
In the assessment tools that you use, are you've made an adjustment in some cases, but are they ones that you all have created?
No, it's just the one that we're having to switch it because they are no longer using it, but it's just the Stanford 10, and so it was the same assessment that we were giving our students, but that got discontinued this year. But because it was the same assessment, we could take the percentile and put, to show where our students were and compare exact students, so that we could say, okay, if a student's at this level, this is a student who they would be about the same level at. This is about the amount of support that this student needs, and so it was an exact comparison. So that was helpful.
It makes it a lot easier to judge whether or not a student can be successful, because you are looking at like real data of your students and not just, well, here's what it looks like in Minneapolis or here's what it looks like across the country,
Right.
So that's really helpful. So coming up, I don't know what we're going to do next.
We got to figure it out. But.
Yeah.
If you don't, if the 6th grade is when that before school thing starts, is that what?
Yes.
Yeah.
So what do you provide for lower school?
Well, actually, so that's a great point. So lower school actually just started last year, not this past year, but the year before, they actually started doing academic support as well. So it's primarily happened in a partnership with a local college that's kind of right up the street, where they send students after school, and the kids kind of parents sign up for that. And most of it's reading, because reading is the big deal. You can read, and you can read a math problem. You may not understand the concept, but at least you can read the problem. So that's been a huge deal. So that's been a slow adjustment, and I know Leslie really has some desire to try to see how we can expand that out. But yeah.
No, I was just gonna say, a little under 10 minutes left. Do you want to talk about family ministry?
Yeah. So thanks for that time, Pete.
Appreciate it.
We all have our gifts. Keeping time is one of them. Parent family ministry. So let's talk a little bit about that. As Russ mentioned, there's a really high level of accountability that we have with parents, and we find that that high level of accountability is one of the major reasons why the school is successful, because there's an accountability level that's really high. So here's what it looks like. We have, once students get accepted, parents actually agree to a covenant that we're in together. During that time, we talk about being in it together, and so they agree to these different things here that are listed. So this is on your family ministry. So there's a parent orientation that happens in the summer. That's for everybody, every single year, every parent, no matter how long you've been here, you have to come to orientation. And certainly we get a number of families who have been here for a long time and say, do we need to come to parent orientation? Yes, you need to come to parent orientation. For the most part, those families really enjoy it because we do it in such a different way. It's not just, okay, here's all the stuff for this past year we actually started like a convocation. So there's like a worship celebration that we're kind of launching the year off, and
staff sang a gospel song.
There you go, exactly. Which some of us, man, you could just blow. Do you know? And then others, you blend in. You do your best lip syncing. Exactly. What'd you say? Oh, what? Yeah,
that's
right.
what they tell you
Exactly.
to say in the choir if you weren't singing.
Exactly. So that happens in the fall and the summer for everyone. Teacher home visits. So Russ talked about that. It's one of the favorite things of even the students as well, especially lower school, obviously. They get so excited because they want to, let me clean up. Can we make some cookies? My teacher's
Does that happen
coming.
during the school year or before?
Yeah. It happens during. So it happens in the fall.
So there's no school those days.
No,
Three days off. Yep. It coincides with when public schools have a big education.
MEA.
Yeah, MEA, Minnesota Education Association.
For training
conference
and stuff for our teachers. So we take that time to have all of our students get a visit from teachers throughout that time. And so for lower school, it's their like classroom teacher. For upper school, it's like a team of teachers. Typically, it's like their advisor or
Yeah, and you're not supposed to talk about grades or behavior at the home visit. It's just
it's all relationship.
That's great.
So my wife, since I was on staff longer than our kids were there, she's like, so what happens? What happens at the because she was what do we need to do? What am I supposed to say? And I'm like, well, you just sit back and enjoy. And for her, that's kind of hard. She's a very kind of strategic, So teacher home visits happens once in the fall. Parent Involvement Day, that used to be called Saturday School, so that happens twice a year. It's an actual school day for kids, so they're required to be here, but parents are also required to be here. So part of the morning, it's a half a day from 9 to noon. Part of the morning, parents are with their child in class. And now this is not like you're in class and you're just observing. Like they're actually a part of the lesson. And so there's breakouts where they have to do that. Parent-teacher conferences happen twice a year. Family tuition conference in the spring. That's where we kind of project out what your tuition will be for the following year. And then volunteering at any all-school events. Now, let's just talk really quickly here about the accountability with this, because that's the key. Like, how do you hold parents accountable to that? So Russ mentioned that, for some of these things, things. If you don't show up, then you've got a window of time where you need to make it up. And we actually have made now some modifications even to that, right? You grow and you learn. You say, okay, well, this doesn't work. There's a burden on the administrative staff to try to call parents and say, okay, you need to, and so we started, we implemented a parent report card. And so all of these events, when you either show up, you don't show up, you need to, now it's a shorter window of time where you need to make it up. We used to have like a couple of weeks where you can, and that just got too much. Nope. You've known about this before the school year. You knew about it when it came, and now you've got a small window of time to make it up. So if you make it up, then you get a lesser grade, but you made it. If you don't make it up, then you get a different grade. Now, at the end of the year, and those report cards get handed out to parents during parent-teacher conferences.
Which are how frequently? How frequent?
Twice a year.
Twice a year.
And then they get them at tuition conferences as well. So a total of 3 times a year in person, and then we mail one home at the end as well. So 3 times a year, just like students get their report cards, or twice a year for students, but 3 times for parents. And so if a parent is good on everything, they get a 3. If you had to make something up, it's a 2. If you didn't make it at all, it's a 1. You don't want 1s. And so at the end of the year and throughout the year, we're looking at that and they're saying, okay, where are parents at? We're having conversation with them. Hey, how's it going? How can we encourage you? Sometimes we get like really good reasons why, and okay, good. So we're never going to hold you to a level of accountability where you're not able to meet. But if we haven't heard from you, which there are a few families we haven't heard from, if you put them in a lineup, I wouldn't even be able to tell you who they were. At the end of the year, then we give them every opportunity to say, to try to make up, and if they don't, then they get a dismissal letter. We tell them, for whatever reasons, your child is not going to be enrolled, or children. And sometimes, again, it's multiple children. Now, we would only do that, though, if there's been, like, 0 communication, and so we do everything we can to. Now, before that wasn't formally in place. One of the reasons, one of the things that we've done since I've been on here is to try to formalize that. So there was accountability, but that formalized aspect. Usually, if we're going to dismiss a family, it's because of the student. Very rarely was it because of the parent. And so now it's like, well, nope, this is a partnership all the way around. It's student, it's parent. Everybody has a commitment to be here. And if that's not something that you can live into, then we want you to be at a place where that commitment level isn't high. And so you can still be at a school. But here, it's going to take something a little bit different. So we've seen a lot of success with that. And some hard conversations, one which I've got to have when I go back that I'm not looking forward to, but it's a parent who, again, hardly any communication throughout the year. So at the end of the year, she got a letter, and then that's when my phone rang. So we'll have to have that conversation. But beyond just the commitment stuff, there's also the support. So we do a lot of things to try to support families. We try to have opportunities for them to connect with each other. Like I said, we hired a clinical social worker. So she's actually an independent clinical social worker. She's got a terminal degree, and so. But a solid believer, which is beautiful to have, and she does a lot of work with families, especially because the minute you introduce poverty, there's 50 million tentacles that come outside of that, from sometimes homelessness to violence to any number of things that she's able to help our parents navigate through. So that's a little bit about the family ministry side.
One more.
Yeah, questions.
Back to when you were talking about the parents have to subscribe to your Christian education tenets.
Yeah.
So they say, yes, you can teach my child this. That's okay with me. But what about their willingness? Do you talk to them about their willingness to support that at home?
Yeah, so that's a part of the covenant.
Not that I'm telling them what they have to believe, but they have to at least, well, it would be nice if they would support at home. If I say, you can't just slug that student just because they hit you, because that's not what we're about.
For us, that's not a nice to have, that's a need to have. So
It's hard when they're hearing totally different at home. Not that they're going to argue with me what I do at school, but if they're not subscribing to it at home, it's difficult.